What if the most important clues in one of America's most haunting unsolved cases didn't come from the past, but from right now? For more than 3 decades, the disappearance of 3 women from a quiet Springfield home has refused to fade. No screams heard. No forced entry. No bodies found. Just 3 lives erased overnight. And for years, it felt like every theory had been exhausted, every lead chased into a dead end. But 2026 has changed something. New eyes. New technology. And overlooked details that suddenly don't look so small anymore. Before we go any further, if you're drawn to cases that refuse to stay silent, cases where time itself becomes part of the mystery, make sure you're subscribed. Turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. And if you believe forgotten cases deserve fresh attention, tap like now. It helps more than you know. Now let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what's new, we have to understand what everyone thinks they already know. On the night of June 6, 1992, Springfield, Missouri, was buzzing. Graduation celebrations filled the air. Parties spilled into the streets. It was loud, carefree, and ordinary. By morning, 3 women would be gone without a trace. Suzanne Streeter was just 19. Her mother, Sherrill Levitt, was 47. And Suzanne's friend, Stacy McCall, was 18. Stacy had planned to sleep at another friend's house that night, but a last-minute change brought her to the small home on East Delmar Street instead. That single decision still echoes through the case. When friends arrived the next morning to pick them up, they noticed something strange. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The front door was unlocked. The TV was on. Personal items were left behind. Purses. Cars. Cigarettes. Makeup. Everything suggested they had planned to come back. Nothing appeared ransacked. And that's where the mystery deepened. There were no obvious signs of violence. No broken windows. No forced entry. Even the dog was calm. It was as if the women had simply stepped outside and vanished. Police initially treated the scene cautiously, but not urgently. In fact, well-meaning friends cleaned up the house before investigators fully grasped what they were dealing with. Ashtrays were emptied. Bedding was moved. Potential evidence was unknowingly erased. That early misstep would haunt the investigation for decades. Over the years, suspects came and went. Theories piled up. A local gravedigger. A serial offender. Organized crime. A stranger. Someone they knew. Every angle seemed possible, yet none could be proven. But here's where 2026 enters the story. For a long time, investigators focused almost entirely on who might have taken the women. New analysis shifts the focus to how the disappearance actually unfolded, minute by minute. Modern behavioral reconstruction has started asking a different question. Why would 3 women, in the middle of the night, leave their home willingly? Recent reviews of witness statements, enhanced with AI-assisted timeline modeling, have revealed something unsettling. Several neighbors reported sounds that were dismissed at the time. Not screams. Not gunshots. But movement. Doors opening. Cars idling briefly. Then silence. In 1992, those details felt meaningless. In 2026, they don't. When analysts reconstructed the likely sequence using current threat compliance models, a chilling pattern emerged. If someone arrived at the house appearing authoritative, calm, and non-threatening, the women may have complied without resistance. Someone who didn't need to force their way in. Someone who didn't raise alarm. Someone who understood how to control a situation quietly. That reframes everything. Another overlooked detail gaining new attention is the porch light. It was found shattered. For years, it was brushed off as accidental. But recent forensic reinterpretation suggests it may have been broken after the women left, not before. That implies something else was happening outside the house. Something the women weren't meant to see. Then there's the phone calls. In the days following the disappearance, several silent calls were made to the Levitt home. No voice. No breathing. Just dead air. At the time, tracing technology was limited. Today, analysts believe the timing of those calls wasn't random. They may have been made to confirm whether anyone had returned. Or worse, to relive the moment. What's especially disturbing is how the case stalled, not because of lack of interest, but because of too many possibilities. Without a crime scene, without bodies, without physical evidence, the investigation slowly froze in place. Until now. In 2026, cold case units began redigitizing everything. Audio tapes. Handwritten notes. Old tip lines. Thousands of pieces of data that were once impossible to connect are now being analyzed together. And something unexpected surfaced. A pattern of tips that were previously dismissed as unreliable, now align with each other. Different callers. Different years. Same underlying detail. A vehicle seen near the house that night, described inconsistently at the time, now matches a specific class of cars uncommon in Springfield in 1992, but not unheard of. That vehicle keeps appearing in tips linked to other unresolved cases in nearby counties. No arrests have been made. No names officially released. But for the first time in years, investigators aren't just re-asking old questions. They're asking new ones. And the biggest question of all is this. What if the Springfield Three weren't targeted randomly, but chosen because the house itself made them vulnerable? A corner lot. Limited visibility. A predictable routine. That idea is sending chills through modern analysts. Because it suggests the crime wasn't impulsive. It was practiced. And if that's true, then the Springfield Three may not be an isolated mystery, but part of something much larger. If this case has already pulled you in, pause for a moment and let me know in the comments where you first heard about the Springfield Three. Was it years ago, or just now? Your engagement tells the algorithm this story still matters. In the next phase, we're going deeper into the suspects that were once written off, and why 2026 technology is forcing investigators to look at them again. Because one name, long considered a dead end, is quietly resurfacing. And it changes everything. People assumed the suspects in the Springfield Three case had all been exhausted. That every name had been checked, crossed out, and buried under time. But what if some of those names were never truly cleared, just inconvenient? Before we go any further, if you want the full picture as this story unfolds, make sure you're subscribed right now. These cases only move forward when people keep watching, keep questioning, and keep sharing. Drop a like if you believe unresolved cases deserve renewed pressure, and stay with me, because what we're about to uncover was hiding in plain sight. For years, one of the biggest problems in the Springfield Three investigation wasn't a lack of suspects. It was too many of them. Early on, law enforcement received thousands of tips. Some were wild. Some were malicious. Some were heartbreaking. And some were quietly shelved because they didn't fit the narrative investigators believed at the time. In 2026, cold case analysts began doing something different. Instead of asking, "Is this suspect guilty?" they asked, "Why was this suspect dismissed?" That subtle shift reopened doors long thought sealed. One of the first names to resurface belonged to a man who lived disturbingly close to the Delmar Street home. At the time, proximity alone wasn't enough to hold attention. He had no criminal record that stood out. No direct connection to the women. No obvious motive. So he faded into the background. But modern behavioral profiling doesn't dismiss proximity so easily. In fact, it treats it as a cornerstone. New analysis showed that the timing of his movements that night didn't align with his original statement. Back in the 1990s, investigators lacked the tools to verify those inconsistencies. In 2026, they don't. Cell tower reconstruction, even from limited historical data, suggested his phone activity pattern didn't match his claimed whereabouts. It didn't place him at the scene. But it didn't place him where he said he was either. That gap matters. Another name drawing renewed attention is one that longtime followers of the case may remember but were told to forget. A convicted offender who was incarcerated shortly after the disappearances. For decades, officials publicly downplayed any connection, stating there was no evidence tying him to the Springfield Three. And technically, that was true. There was no physical evidence. But what was overlooked were similarities in approach. In other confirmed crimes, this individual used manipulation rather than force. He exploited trust, authority, confusion. He entered homes without breaking in. Sound familiar? In the early 90s, those similarities were considered circumstantial. Today, they're treated as behavioral fingerprints. What's especially chilling is that recent interviews with retired officers revealed something that was never widely discussed. This suspect was questioned early, and investigators reportedly felt something was off. But feelings aren't evidence. So the file was closed. Now, forensic linguists are re-examining transcripts from those early interviews. Subtle phrasing. Evasive patterns. Changes in tense. These are things modern analysis picks up instantly. And the results aren't comforting. Then there's the suspect almost no one wanted to talk about. Because he wasn't a stranger. He was someone on the edge of the women's social orbit. Not close enough to be obvious. Not distant enough to be invisible. At the time, investigators were careful. Accusing someone within the community without hard proof could destroy lives. So when his alibi couldn't be fully confirmed but also couldn't be disproven, the trail went cold. But 2026 technology doesn't rely on single alibis. It cross-references everything. Financial activity. Employment schedules. Third-party timelines. Micropatterns in behavior before and after the disappearance. And when analysts overlaid those data points, something unsettling emerged. His routine changed dramatically after June 6, 1992. Not immediately. Not suspiciously fast. But gradually. A move. A job change. A withdrawal from social circles. Individually, meaningless. Together, they formed a pattern of avoidance. Still not proof. But no longer ignorable. What's perhaps most disturbing is how many potential suspects were dismissed because investigators believed the crime required strength or violence. In 2026, experts disagree. The prevailing theory now suggests compliance, not confrontation. 3 women may have left that house because they believed they had to. Or because they believed they were helping someone. Or because someone made them think they had no choice. That opens the door to a completely different type of offender. Someone calm. Convincing. Possibly familiar with law enforcement procedures. Someone who knew how to create urgency without panic. And once you view the case through that lens, the suspect pool changes dramatically. Another overlooked element now under scrutiny is timing. The abduction likely occurred in a narrow window, when noise would blend into the background of graduation celebrations. Cars coming and going wouldn't draw attention. Voices raised wouldn't stand out. Whoever did this understood the environment. That suggests planning. And planning suggests prior observation. Which brings us to something chilling uncovered in recent reviews. Several tips over the years mentioned unfamiliar vehicles slowly passing the Delmar Street house in the weeks leading up to the disappearance. At the time, they were dismissed as coincidence. In 2026, analysts mapped those sightings. They weren't random. They followed a pattern consistent with surveillance. Someone was watching. Learning routines. Waiting. And that raises a question that's deeply unsettling. Were Suzanne, Stacy, and Sherrill the original targets, or the available ones? Because if the house was chosen rather than the individuals, it suggests the crime could have happened to anyone living there. And that means the offender wasn't emotionally driven. They were methodical. As more files are digitized, investigators are also revisiting one of the most controversial claims tied to the case. That the women were taken to a secondary location. For years, searches focused on nearby areas. Fields. Abandoned buildings. Bodies of water. All came up empty. Now, analysts believe the location may have been farther away than originally assumed. Why? Because compliance-based abductions allow time. Time to drive. Time to relocate. Time to erase traces. That theory aligns with something else that's resurfacing. An anonymous tip from the late 90s describing a remote site outside Springfield, dismissed due to lack of specificity. New satellite mapping and land use analysis show the area has since been altered significantly. Covered. Built over. Changed. If something was hidden there, it may no longer be accessible. And that realization has shifted the investigation from recovery to accountability. If you're still here, take a second and tell me in the comments which theory you've always believed. Stranger. Someone they knew. Or something more organized. Your perspective matters more than you think. Moving forward, we're going to look at the evidence that was accidentally destroyed, and how modern science is still finding answers in what remains. Because one small detail, ignored for decades, is now being called the most important clue of all. And once you hear it, you'll understand why this case may finally be moving again. For decades, people believed the Springfield Three case was doomed by one irreversible mistake. The house was cleaned. Evidence was lost. And whatever answers existed were swept away before investigators truly understood what had happened. But here's the part almost no one talks about. Even when evidence is gone, absence itself can still speak. Before we go any further, if you want to see this case followed all the way to its deepest layers, make sure you're subscribed. Stories like this don't resurface by accident. They resurface because people refuse to let them disappear. Drop a like if you believe silence shouldn't win, and stay with me, because what remains may be more revealing than what was lost. When friends entered the Delmar Street house that morning, they weren't thinking about crime scenes. They were thinking about graduation plans. Missed rides. Oversleeping teenagers. So they did what anyone might do. They cleaned. Ashtrays were emptied. Bedding was adjusted. Cups were moved. Small, human actions that unknowingly erased fingerprints, DNA, and trace evidence that could never be recovered. For years, investigators believed that mistake had sealed the case's fate. But in 2026, forensic philosophy has changed. Modern analysts don't just study what is present. They study what should have been. And the gaps are startling. Take the purses. All three women's purses were left behind. Wallets. IDs. Money. Cigarettes. Keys. That tells us something critical. Whatever happened unfolded quickly, but not chaotically. People don't voluntarily leave without essentials unless they believe they're coming back. That belief is the clue. Which means the event that removed them from the house didn't feel final to them at the time. Another overlooked detail is footwear. Shoes were left behind. Not just one pair. Multiple. That matters because it suggests the women didn't plan to walk far, didn't anticipate danger, and didn't perceive urgency. Modern threat assessment experts now agree on something investigators in the early 90s couldn't confidently say. This wasn't a panic-driven exit. It was a controlled one. Then there's the television. Still on. Volume low. A subtle detail, but an important one. It implies the environment was calm up until the very last moment. No struggle loud enough to warrant turning it off. No sudden fear that disrupted normal behavior. The house wasn't frozen in chaos. It was frozen mid-routine. And that's deeply unsettling. In 2026, forensic acoustics specialists reviewed the layout of the home using digital reconstructions. They tested how sound traveled from room to room, from inside the house to the street. What they found was chilling. A quiet but firm conversation near the front door would not have been heard by neighbors. Even raised voices could blend into the background noise of passing cars and distant celebrations that night. Which means if someone stood at that door speaking calmly, but authoritatively, no one would have noticed. And that brings us to one of the most critical reevaluations of the case. The shattered porch light. For years, it was treated as irrelevant. An accident. A coincidence. But modern fracture analysis suggests something else. The glass pattern indicates it was likely broken outward, not inward. That changes the story. If the women had left voluntarily, the light wouldn't need to be broken. Unless someone didn't want the house visible afterward. Unless someone wanted darkness. That implies post-departure activity. Someone returning to the scene. Another detail now under renewed focus is the answering machine. A message was reportedly erased accidentally before police could listen to it. At the time, that loss felt devastating. But investigators later learned something unexpected. The timing of incoming calls around the disappearance suggested repeated checking behavior. Someone wanted to know if the house was empty. Someone wanted confirmation. In 2026, analysts mapped call timing patterns across similar crimes. The behavior aligns with offenders who revisit the scene emotionally, even if not physically. That suggests familiarity. Possession. Control. And then there's the detail almost no one paid attention to. The dog. The dog didn't bark excessively. Didn't show signs of distress. Didn't react as if strangers had violently invaded the home. That matters more than people realize. Animals respond to tone, not just faces. If the person at the door had been aggressive, the dog likely would have reacted. If the person was calm, confident, and unthreatening, the dog's reaction makes sense. Which brings investigators to one chilling conclusion. Whoever came to that house knew how to present themselves. Knew how to manage fear. Knew how to keep things quiet. Another piece of the puzzle comes from environmental forensics. The lack of disturbance outside the home. No tire marks. No visible struggle. No neighbors reporting sudden commotion. In 2026, analysts reconstructed likely vehicle positions and departure routes using traffic flow data from that era. They found multiple low-visibility exit paths that would allow someone to leave the area without drawing attention. This wasn't luck. It was knowledge. And knowledge suggests familiarity with the neighborhood. One of the most haunting realizations from recent reviews is this. The crime didn't need force. It needed compliance. And compliance is easier to achieve when victims believe resistance would make things worse. Or when they believe they're helping someone. Or when they believe authority is involved. That realization reframes everything. It explains the lack of struggle. The missing urgency. The untouched belongings. It also explains why no physical evidence was ever found. Because there may never have been a violent struggle at the house at all. The violence, if it occurred, happened somewhere else. Another element gaining attention is time distortion. Victims in controlled situations often lose track of time. They comply longer than expected. They delay resistance. They hope the situation will resolve. That could explain why no alarm was raised. Why no neighbors noticed anything alarming. Why the house looked peaceful. Because in that moment, it may have been. What's perhaps most chilling is how close investigators believe the case came to being solved early on, without realizing it. Several tips described behavior that didn't seem criminal on the surface. A calm man. A polite interaction. A brief stop. At the time, nothing about those details screamed danger. Now, they scream precision. And this leads us to the most important realization yet. The Springfield Three case may not be defined by what went wrong. It may be defined by what went right for the offender. No noise. No resistance. No witnesses who recognized danger in time. And that's why this case stayed cold for so long. Because it didn't look like a crime. If you've made it this far, pause and think about this. How many times have we been taught to look for chaos when danger can arrive quietly? Drop a comment if this perspective changes how you see the case. Your engagement keeps. Finally, we're going to confront the hardest question of all. Why, after all these years, hasn't anyone been charged? And what would it actually take for the Springfield Three case to finally move from mystery to resolution? Because the truth is, the answer may already exist. There's a question that has followed the Springfield Three case for more than 3 decades. If so much lines up, if so many pieces point in the same direction, why has no one ever been charged? Before we go any further, if you've stayed with this story to the very end, make sure you're subscribed. Cold cases don't move forward because of time. They move forward because people keep watching, keep talking, and keep demanding answers. Drop a like if you believe unresolved cases deserve closure, and stay with me, because this final part brings everything into focus. The uncomfortable truth is this. Solving a case isn't the same as proving it in court. Investigators can be morally certain. Analysts can see patterns. Behavioral experts can agree on what likely happened. But without physical evidence, prosecutors face a wall. And the Springfield Three case is nothing but walls. No bodies. No crime scene containing definitive forensic proof. No clear time of death. No cause of death. Without those elements, even the strongest suspect becomes legally untouchable. In 2026, law enforcement isn't asking, who did this, as much as they're asking, what can we prove? And that distinction changes everything. Modern investigators now believe the case hinges on one critical breakthrough. Not a confession. Not a witness suddenly remembering something new. But a convergence. A moment when technology, timing, and human behavior finally align. One area receiving intense attention is digital legacy evidence. In the early 90s, people didn't realize how much information they left behind. Employment records. Utility logs. Handwritten notes. Third-party schedules. Minor interactions that seemed irrelevant. Today, analysts can reconstruct weeks of someone's life using fragments. And that's where hope still exists. Investigators are quietly re-examining individuals who lived ordinary lives afterward. People who blended in. People who never committed another crime serious enough to draw attention. Because not all offenders repeat loudly. Some stop. Some age out. Some believe they got away with it. Another emerging focus is indirect accountability. Even if the primary offender can't be prosecuted, others may have helped knowingly or unknowingly. A ride. A location. Silence. In 2026, obstruction and facilitation laws are far more robust than they were decades ago. That means someone who didn't commit the crime itself could still face consequences. And that changes the pressure dynamics dramatically. Then there's the possibility investigators rarely discuss publicly. That someone has already tried to tell the truth, but wasn't believed. Over the years, tips came in that didn't fit the prevailing narrative. People who sounded unsure. People who contradicted themselves. People whose stories felt incomplete. At the time, inconsistency meant unreliability. Now, analysts recognize something else. Trauma distorts memory. Fear delays honesty. Guilt complicates timelines. Someone may still be carrying pieces of this story, afraid of the consequences of speaking clearly. And time changes fear. As people age, priorities shift. Regrets surface. The need to unburden grows stronger. Investigators believe the most likely resolution won't come from discovery, but from disclosure. Someone saying what they know. Not everything. Just enough. Another reason charges haven't been filed is something the public rarely considers. Wrongful accusations can destroy cases forever. Law enforcement knows that once a suspect is publicly named without airtight proof, defense teams gain leverage. Stories get contaminated. Witnesses get influenced. Errors become permanent. So investigators move quietly. Slowly. Painfully so. Because this isn't about closure headlines. It's about getting it right. There's also the reality that some answers may never be confirmed publicly. If evidence was destroyed. If locations were altered. If key individuals have passed away. The truth may exist only as a near certainty, not a courtroom verdict. And that's one of the hardest truths families and communities must face. But here's what 2026 has changed. The case is no longer frozen. Files are being reviewed. Patterns are being mapped. Names are being re-examined. And silence is no longer assumed to mean innocence. The Springfield Three case now stands as a reminder of how crime doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it arrives calmly, politely, quietly, and disappears just as smoothly. What this case teaches us goes beyond three missing women. It teaches us how easily trust can be used as a weapon. How routine can become vulnerability. How moments that feel safe can be anything but. And perhaps most importantly, it reminds us that attention matters. Every view. Every comment. Every conversation keeps pressure alive. If you believe Suzanne, Stacy, and Sherrill still deserve answers, share this story. Talk about it. Keep it visible. Because cases don't stay cold when people refuse to forget them. And if one person watching this knows something they've never said out loud, this is your moment. Time doesn't erase truth. It only waits for it. If you've watched all 4 parts, let me know in the comments. And tell me this. Do you think the answer is already known, or still waiting to be spoken? Either way, the silence around the Springfield Three is finally starting to crack.